I want you to imagine an industry at just the absolute peak of its power.
Right, like total cultural dominance.
Exactly. We are talking about a sector that is generating billions of dollars, defining the pop culture of an entire generation, and just completely dominating the retail landscape.
You couldn't escape it.
You really couldn't. But then, I want you to imagine that same unstoppable force practically vanishing from store shelves.
Yeah.
And not over, like, a decade, but seemingly overnight.
Yeah, an implosion so severe that mainstream financial analysts actually declared the entire medium a dead fad. Like, they thought it was never going to return.
Which is wild.
It's unbelievable. The sheer scale of that collapse remains, to this day, one of the most studied events in modern business history.
Because it wasn't a slow decline.
No, not at all. If you look at the charts from that era, it is a vertical climb followed by a sheer cliff face, just a total drop-off.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because today's deep dive is taking us on a chronological journey. We're going from the late 1970s boom of the video game industry, straight into the devastating 1983 crash, and finally into the incredibly methodical late 1980s recovery.
It's a hell of a timeline.
It really is. And our core focus today, the central mystery we're unraveling for you, is how unchecked oversaturation and an absolute abandonment of quality control triggered one of the most dramatic, self-inflicted collapses in entertainment history.
And what's fascinating here really is the complete lack of external forces to blame.
Right, there wasn't some outside disaster.
Exactly. There was no sudden global macroeconomic depression, no catastrophic supply chain shortage of silicon, no sudden demographic shift.
It was all an inside job, basically.
Completely. The architecture of this collapse was entirely internal. It was built on deeply flawed assumptions about, well, consumer psychology, retail economics, and platform control.
They did it to themselves.
They really did. It was an industry that just gorged itself on its own success and was violently forced to mature.
So we have to establish the sheer scale of the boom to even begin to understand the gravity of the bust, right?
Yeah, you have to see how high they flew.
Right. So let's look at 1982. The industry is pulling in over $8 billion annually in the United States alone.
$8 billion in 1982 dollars.
Which is astronomical. And you had this dual explosion happening. The public sphere, arcades were just swallowing quarters at an incomprehensible rate.
Oh, absolutely. Games like Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, Defender, Galaga, they were everywhere.
Malls, pizza parlors, waiting rooms, you couldn't go anywhere without hearing those bleeps and bloops.
Right, they were a public fixture.
But the second part of that explosion, and this is the one that really sets the stage for our story today, was happening inside the living room.
Yeah, the transition from the arcade to the home, it was a seismic shift in consumer behavior.
And that was driven almost entirely by one machine, right? The Atari 2600.
Primarily, yes. Because when it launched, the concept of interactive home entertainment was still, largely theoretical for the average family.
Like science fiction.
Right. Early sales were actually quite modest. The breakthrough really required a conceptual bridge. They had to bring those recognizable, highly addictive arcade experiences directly onto the family television set.
Put yourself in the shoes of a consumer back then. Before the Atari 2600 really gained traction, if you wanted to play, say, Space Invaders, you had to physically travel to a location.
Stand in a noisy room.
Exactly. Stand in a dark, noisy room and pay per attempt.
A quarter at a time.
Right. But then suddenly, for a fixed upfront cost,
Yeah.
that exact experience is just sitting on your living room carpet.
You own it.
You own it. The value proposition there must have felt like a massive technological leap forward, like having a private cinema installed in your house.
Oh, totally. And that perceived value fundamentally altered household entertainment budgets. Atari completely dominated this new paradigm.
You were practically printing money.
Hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. They effectively became a generic trademark.
Right, like Kleenex or Band-Aid.
Exactly. People didn't say they were playing video games. They said, I'm playing Atari.
Even if it was a totally different console.
Right. And the corporate ecosystem surrounding Atari looked at that explosive trajectory and, well, they made a fatal compounding error.
Okay, this is where we start seeing the foundation crack. What was the assumption they were making?
They assumed the demand curve was permanently vertical.
Meaning it would just never go down.
Never. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is the classic corporate delusion of infinite frictionless growth.
Oh, we see that all the time today.
We do. Executive leadership and Wall Street investors looked at the sales numbers from 1980 to 1982 and just forecasted that the trend would continue perpetually.
Just a straight line pointing up.
Exactly. They modeled their manufacturing, their hiring, and their inventory storage entirely on a scenario where consumer appetite would never wane.
So they are building this massive infrastructure for a reality that simply doesn't exist.
Right.
They are assuming every single family in America is going to eventually buy a console and then keep buying games at the exact same frantic rate forever.
Which defies basic economics.
It really does. That level of sheer blindness to economic gravity is staggering. But Atari wasn't just facing their own internal hubris, were they?
No, there was a systemic shift happening underneath them.
Right. The very nature of how games were made and sold was about to undergo this radical, unchecked transformation.
Yeah, and that transformation begins with a fundamental shift in labor and recognition.
Which is such an interesting angle.
It is. So in the late 1970s, Atari operated as a completely closed ecosystem. They built the hardware, and their internal programmers built all the software.
Okay, kept it all in-house.
Exactly. But those software engineers, the people who were actually writing the code that generated millions of dollars in revenue, they were treated as anonymous, highly replaceable cogs in the corporate machine.
Yeah, I was reading through the source material about this, and the dynamic between the developers and Atari management is just striking.
It was very tense.
Right. You have these brilliant engineers creating massive hits, but they aren't allowed to put their names on the boxes. They can't put their names in the game code.
Nothing. Total anonymity.
They're treated less like artists or authors and more like assembly line workers stamping out plastic.
And the corporate parent company at the time viewed them precisely that way. The prevailing management philosophy was that the Atari brand itself was the star, not the individual programmer.
The logo was the celebrity.
Exactly. And this friction reached a boiling point in 1979. A group of top Atari programmers, including guys like David Crane and Larry Kaplan, they actually saw internal documents detailing the millions of dollars their specific games were generating.
Oh, that's a dangerous memo to leave lying around.
Right. So they went to management, asked for better compensation and public credit, and were allegedly told by the CEO that they were no more important than the people putting the cartridges into the cardboard boxes.
Wow. Just completely dismissed.
Yeah, total insult.
And that one conversation right there essentially fractures the entire industry. Because those programmers don't just put their heads down and go back to their desks.
No, they don't.
They walk out the door.
They walk out and they found Activision.
Boom.
This is the watershed moment. Activision becomes the very first third-party video game developer in history.
Because before this, that concept didn't even exist.
It didn't. They proved that an external company could reverse engineer the Atari 2600 architecture, manufacture their own physical cartridges, and sell them directly to consumers without giving Atari a single cent.
Okay, let me push back on this for a second, though.
Sure.
Looking at this purely from an economic and consumer standpoint, isn't an open market usually highly beneficial?
Generally, yes.
Right. You introduce competition, you break a monopoly, you theoretically drive down prices, and you incentivize innovation.
Yeah.
Why does breaking Atari's monopoly become the poison pill that triggers the crash?
It's a great question. And it comes down to the complete absence of a curation mechanism.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Think about the economic model of modern digital marketplaces. Like, if you build an app for a modern smartphone, you can't just forcefully install it on the device, right?
You have to go through the App Store.
Exactly. The platform holder, the phone manufacturer, has a rigorous certification process. They check the app for malicious code, they ensure it meets quality standards, and of course, they take a licensing fee.
They get their cut.
They control the ecosystem to protect the user experience. But the Atari 2600 had absolutely none of that architecture. None of it.
So there was no physical or legal way for Atari to stop someone from just making a game for their console?
Well, Atari certainly attempted to stop them through aggressive litigation.
Oh, I'm sure they sued everyone.
They did. They argued that Activision was stealing trade secrets, but Atari lost. The courts ruled that anyone could legally produce and sell a cartridge that physically fit into the Atari 2600. So the floodgates didn't just open. The dam was completely obliterated.
Which means we go from a few dozen carefully managed in-house releases to an absolute free-for-all.
Total anarchy.
I want you to picture the sheer chaos of this open market. You have dozens of venture capital firms and totally unrelated corporate entities suddenly realizing there is zero barrier to entry here.
Anybody could do it.
Right. We aren't just talking about rival tech companies making games. We are talking about food conglomerates like Quaker Oats, creating video game divisions purely to cash in on the hype.
It's absurd. Quaker Oats making video games.
Literally a cereal and dog food company trying to sell you a $40 piece of software.
And because the initial margins were so lucrative, the market was rapidly saturated with these speculative, incredibly low-effort products.
That's grabs.
Total cash grabs. Within months, the amount of available titles ballooned into the hundreds. And this is where the retail mechanism fundamentally breaks down. Well, retail buyers, the managers at major department stores tasked with actually stocking the shelves, they had absolutely no expertise in video games.
They were probably used to buying sporting goods or board games.
Exactly. They saw the massive sales numbers from 1981, and they just blindly ordered massive quantities of every new title that appeared in their catalogs.
So they're looking at an aisle full of hundreds of different games.
Yeah.
And the boxes are tricky, right? The box art is consistently spectacular.
Oh, gorgeous.
These beautiful hand-painted sci-fi landscapes or intense action scenes.
Roster pieces on the cardboard.
But the actual consumer in 1982 has no magazines to read for reviews, no internet to check, literally no way to verify the quality of what's inside that box.
It's a total guessing game.
It's like an unmoderated app store, but every single app costs $40.
Which is a lot of money now, let alone in the early 80s. The consumer is effectively playing Russian roulette with their wallet.
That's exactly what it was.
They bring the game home, plug it in, and discover that the beautiful box art is hiding a fundamentally broken, barely interactive piece of garbage.
And the moment that happens, the trust between the publisher and the player begins to heavily erode.
It vanishes.
But, the saturation of all this third-party garbage was really only half of the equation, wasn't it?
Right.
Because Atari's internal reaction to this new competition actually accelerated their own demise.
It really did. Because remember, Atari is suddenly bleeding top-tier talent to these new third-party studios.
They're losing their best guys.
Exactly. And their response isn't to slow down, regroup, and focus on software quality.
No, that would make too much sense.
Their response is to brute force their way through the market by exploiting high-profile licensing agreements regardless of the development reality.
They figured brand recognition would save them.
Yes. To maintain market dominance, Atari's executive leadership implemented aggressively compressed development cycles.
Just rushing things out the door.
They believed that brand recognition alone would drive sales, regardless of the underlying software quality. And this corporate philosophy birthed the two most infamous software disasters in the history of the medium.
We have to dive deeply into the twin titans of disappointment here. The home console ports of Pac-Man and E.T. the Extraterrestrial.
Oh, boy.
Because these aren't just bad games, right? They are spectacular, high-profile failures of basic corporate governance.
Totally.
Let's tackle Pac-Man first. The arcade cabinet of Pac-Man is a global phenomenon.
Unstoppable.
Atari secures the rights to bring it to the home console. What is the fundamental disconnect between what Atari promised the consumer and what they actually engineered?
Well, the disconnect lies in the severe hardware limitations of the Atari 2600, juxtaposed against an impossible corporate timeline.
Okay, break that down for us.
So the arcade version of Pac-Man ran on a dedicated Z80 microprocessor. It had specific hardware designed to handle multiple moving objects, sprites, simultaneously.
Built from the ground up to do one thing perfectly.
Exactly. It had ample memory for complex maze layouts and character logic. The Atari 2600, by contrast, was designed back in 1977.
A lifetime ago in tech years.
Right. It was designed to play simple games like Pong and Combat. It had a microscopic 128 bytes of RAM.
Wait, 128 bytes, not megabytes.
That's 128 bytes.
That is unfathomably small.
It's practically nothing. And its graphics chip, the television interface adapter, was incredibly rudimentary. It was only really designed to draw two main sprites on the screen at once.
Oh, I see the problem. Because Pac-Man requires a main character, 4 distinct ghosts, and hundreds of dots all on screen at the exact same time.
Right.
So how does a programmer even attempt to force that much visual information through a hardware bottleneck that small?
Through aggressive, highly compromised visual tricks.
Like what?
The developer assigned to the project, Todd Fry, had to use a technique where the console only draws one ghost per frame of television output. It cycles through the 4 ghosts sequentially.
Ah, so it's drawing them one at a time, really, really fast.
Exactly. But because standard televisions run at 60 frames per second, this cycling meant each ghost was only actually drawn every fourth frame.
which creates that infamous migraine-inducing flicker.
Yes.
The ghosts aren't solid objects on the screen. They're these transparent, flashing aberrations.
It was awful to look at. And on top of that, the colors were wrong, the sound effects were reduced to these harsh metallic clangs, and the gameplay completely lacked the precision of the arcade version.
It's just a vastly inferior product.
Yeah.
But Atari didn't just quietly release this compromised version and hope nobody noticed, did they?
No, no. Atari's forecasting for Pac-Man is a case study in pure mathematical hubris.
This part is wild.
It is. At the time of manufacturing, there were approximately 10 million Atari 2600 consoles out in the market.
10 million machines in people's homes.
Right. Atari ordered the production of 12 million Pac-Man cartridges.
I really need to highlight how insane that logic is to you listening right now. They didn't just assume a 100% attach rate, meaning they assumed every single person on Earth who owned the console would buy the game.
Which itself is impossible.
Right. But they actively assumed that the game would compel 2 million new people to go out and buy a console just to play this specific broken cartridge.
And remember, they manufactured those 12 million copies before anyone outside the company had ever played the finished product.
They were just that confident.
Delusional, really. When it launched in 1982, the initial sales were massive, purely due to the brand name and the marketing campaign.
Because it's Pac-Man. Of course you're going to buy it.
But the word of mouth was instantaneous, and it was catastrophic.
Imagine saving your allowance for weeks or begging your parents for this highly anticipated release, and the moment you turn on the television, you realize you've been sold a completely inferior product.
It's devastating for a kid.
It fundamentally changes how you view the company. Suddenly, the Atari logo doesn't mean quality anymore.
No, it means you got ripped off.
But as damaging as Pac-Man was to their reputation, the timeline and execution of E.T. is even more staggering.
Oh, E.T. is the stuff of legend. Following the unprecedented cinematic success of the E.T. film in the summer of 1982, Atari's parent company negotiated the video game rights directly with Steven Spielberg.
Okay.
They paid an estimated $20 to $25 million just for the licensing fee.
$25 million just for the right to use the name in 1982.
A massive upfront cost.
Which means they need an immediate massive return on investment to justify that expense to the board.
Exactly. So the corporate mandate was absolute. The game had to be on retail shelves for the lucrative 1982 Christmas shopping season.
Okay, but when did they sign the deal?
Well, the licensing negotiations took so long that by the time the rights were actually secured, the manufacturing deadlines left the assigned developer, a guy named Howard Scott Warshaw, with exactly 5 weeks to design, program, and finalize the entire game.
5 weeks. Let's contextualize that timeline for a second. Even for the primitive hardware of the Atari 2600, what was a standard game development cycle back then?
Anywhere from 5 to 7 months.
Okay, so to compress concept, coding, debugging, and final certification into 5 weeks. That isn't just rushing. That's practically asking for a miracle.
It was an impossible task. Now, Warshaw was a highly capable programmer. He had previously developed the hugely successful game Yar's Revenge.
No, he knew what he was doing.
He did. But the 5-week constraint forced profound compromises in game design and testing.
You literally don't have time to play test.
Exactly. The core gameplay loop of E.T. involved navigating a series of screens to find telephone pieces to, phone home, call the spaceship.
It makes sense for the movie.
Right. However, the world was filled with pits.
Ah, the pits. And the collision detection for those pits is what completely broke the experience for the player. Can you explain the specific mechanical failure there? Why was it so frustrating?
Sure. In video game programming, collision detection relies on something called bounding boxes. Okay. These are basically invisible geometric shapes drawn around the player character and around environmental hazards. If the bounding boxes intersect, the game's math registers a collision.
Right.
Because of the incredibly rushed development, the bounding box for the ET sprite was significantly wider than the visual representation of the character on the screen.
Oh, no. So you could be standing visually, totally safely, next to a pit.
But the game's invisible math thinks you are overlapping the edge.
And what happens?
The game registers a fall. You drop to the bottom of the pit.
Okay, Annoying, but you can get out, right?
You slowly levitate out, but the moment you reach the top, if your joystick isn't perfectly positioned, that oversized bounding box registers another collision with the edge.
And you fall right back down.
You fall right back down, over
Yeah.
and over again.
It is an exercise in pure frustration.
Yeah.
You have millions of kids on Christmas morning in 1982 turning on this game, and they're essentially trapped in an infinite loop of falling into holes.
While a tiny digital ET just looks miserable.
Right. The cognitive dissonance between the heartwarming, magical feeling of the Steven Spielberg movie and the punishing, broken mechanics of the video game must have been overwhelming.
The critical reception was abysmal, but more importantly, the retail reaction was completely unprecedented.
Because consumers didn't just complain.
No, they physically returned the game to stores in massive numbers.
Just brought it back and asked for a refund.
Exactly. And retailers, who were already struggling with that bloated inventory of third-party garbage we discussed earlier, they demanded that Atari take the inventory back.
And this brings us to a crucial economic concept that really fueled the crash. It wasn't just that Atari missed out on future sales.
No, it was much worse than that.
Because the retail system at the time operated on a practice called stock balancing. Explain that for us.
Stock balancing was a deeply entrenched policy where retailers could return unsold or heavily returned inventory to the manufacturer in exchange for credit toward future purchases.
So it's basically a return policy on steroids for the store.
Exactly. During the boom years, this wasn't an issue because everything sold. But suddenly, massive retail chains are boxing up millions of copies of E.T., millions of copies of Pac-Man, and millions of unsold third-party games and shipping them back to the manufacturers.
So Atari isn't just failing to make new money. They're actively having their previous revenue wiped off the books as these credits are issued.
It's an accounting nightmare.
And the physical manifestation of this financial catastrophe leads to the most enduring, iconic image of the entire crash.
The landfill.
Yes. Tell us about the landfill.
In September of 1983, a fleet of semi-trucks drove to a landfill in Alamogordo, New Mexico.
Alamogordo?
Yeah. And they dumped hundreds of thousands of unsold game cartridges, including vast quantities of E.T. and Pac-Man into the dirt.
Just dunk them in a hole.
And to prevent scavengers from coming and digging them up, the games were crushed by bulldozers and capped with a layer of concrete.
It sounds like an urban legend. For years, people thought it was a myth.
Oh, absolutely.
But it was a literal, tax-deductible write-off of physical inventory. They produced so much garbage, they had to permanently entomb it in the desert.
A literal burial.
And this burial isn't just a quirky historical footnote. It represents the absolute death of consumer trust.
Right. The illusion was broken.
The public realizes that the market is flooded with defective products. But right at this exact moment of maximum vulnerability for the console makers, an entirely different threat materializes from the tech sector.
Yeah, the timing couldn't have been worse for Atari. The console market was incredibly fragile, and it was violently undercut by the sudden accessibility of the home computer.
Enter the PC.
Right. Companies like Commodore, Apple, and Tandy had been producing computers for a while, but they were generally too expensive for the average family.
Like thousands of dollars, right?
Exactly. Way out of reach. But that dynamic changed aggressively with the introduction of the Commodore 64 and the ensuing price wars.
This leads to a fascinating strategic question. When analyzing the timeline here, did the home computer actively assassinate the dedicated video game console? Or did the console industry simply commit suicide and leave a vacuum for the computer to fill?
It really was a symbiotic destruction. The console industry destroyed its own software ecosystem, making their hardware useless. Concurrently, computer manufacturers fundamentally altered the pricing structure of their hardware.
How did they manage to drop the price so much?
Well, Jack Tramiel, the aggressive founder of Commodore, adopted a philosophy of vertical integration.
Okay, meaning what?
Meaning he purchased MOS Technology, the actual company that manufactured the microprocessors. By owning the semiconductor fabrication itself, Commodore could aggressively slash the retail price of their computers.
They cut out the middleman entirely.
Exactly.
So they aren't just lowering prices a little bit to be competitive. They are engaging in a brutal scorched earth price war against competitors like Texas Instruments.
A race to the bottom.
And that drives the price of the Commodore 64 down to levels that directly compete with the price of video game consoles.
Exactly. When the price points achieved parity, the marketing strategy for the home computer shifted brilliantly. They attacked the specific anxiety of the parents who were actually funding these purchases.
Oh, this is so smart. Because if I am a parent in 1983, I've spent the last 2 years watching my kids get incredibly frustrated by $40 game cartridges that barely work.
Right, you're fed up.
I view the Atari as a noisy, expensive, unreliable toy. And then Commodore runs television commercials, explicitly positioning their computer as a vital educational tool.
Guilt-tripping the parents, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're telling me, why buy your child a toy that will rot their brain when for the exact same price you can buy a computer that will prepare them for college?
It was a brilliant Trojan horse strategy.
Because the kids knew what was really going on, right?
Of course. The parents justified the purchase because the computer could theoretically run word processors, balance the household checkbook, and teach the children basic programming.
Sure, homework.
But the reality was that the Commodore 64 had excellent graphics and sound capabilities. It was a phenomenal gaming machine.
So the kids get their games, the parents get their educational justification, and the dedicated console looks completely obsolete.
Left in the dust.
The value proposition of the Atari 2600 collapses from multiple angles simultaneously. The trust in the software is gone, and the hardware has been economically outmaneuvered.
A total checkmate.
And this combination plunges the retail market into the absolute abyss. Let's look at the dark years between 1983 and 1985.
It was grim. The physical retail landscape became a graveyard. Because of the sheer volume of games manufactured during that unchecked boom, warehouses across North America were literally overflowing.
Just mountains of unsold plastic.
Right. So to clear shelf space for other merchandise, retail managers aggressively marked down the inventory.
We are talking about severe liquidation here. Games that were heavily marketed at $40 were dumped into bargain bins for $5.
Then $2.
And sometimes literally 50 cents just to get them out the door. How does this bargain bin economy completely destroy the publishing pipeline?
It creates a catastrophic deflationary spiral. When a consumer can walk into a store and buy 5 different games out of a clearance bin for less than $10 total, they completely stop buying new, full-priced releases.
Why would you spend $40 when you can get 10 games for that price?
Exactly. For the publishers, the revenue stream evaporates overnight. A small third-party developer cannot fund their next project if they have zero incoming cash flow.
They just starve.
They starve. And without new, compelling games to drive foot traffic into the stores, the retailers decide the entire category is toxic.
They wash their hands of it.
The managers look at these aisles of unsold plastic and make a ruthless retail calculation. They clear out the video games entirely and replace the shelf space with traditional toys, sporting goods, or the new home computers we just discussed.
They just erase them from the store.
This physical removal from the retail space was the final nail in the coffin. A medium simply cannot survive without distribution. Dozens of software publishers filed for bankruptcy. Major hardware competitors like Mattel Electronics folded completely. Magnavox exited the market.
Everyone ran for the exits.
And the juggernaut, Atari, experienced a staggering financial hemorrhage.
The numbers for Atari in 1983 are breathtaking. They reported hundreds of millions of dollars in losses. The corporate structure just buckled under the weight.
Total collapse.
They enacted massive layoffs, shedding thousands of employees. Ultimately, the parent company, Warner Communications, decided the bleeding was fatal. They split Atari into pieces and sold off the consumer division.
And the irony of that sale is profound.
Who did they sell it to?
Warner sold the consumer division of Atari to Jack Tramiel.
Wait, a Commodore guy?
The exact same guy. The former head of Commodore, whose aggressive computer pricing had helped engineer Atari's downfall in the first place.
That is Shakespearean.
It really is. And Tramiel largely pivoted the new Atari Corporation away from consoles entirely and toward home computers.
This total systemic failure fundamentally altered the mainstream narrative. If you look at media coverage from 1984, the tone isn't that an industry is going through a rough, cyclical transition.
No, the tone is highly dismissive.
Almost mocking. Financial analysts, journalists, and toy industry executives unilaterally declare that video games were nothing more than a passing fad.
Like they were embarrassed they ever liked them.
Right. They're comparing the Atari to the pet rock or the hula hoop or disco music, a temporary cultural fever that broke, leaving only a massive hangover.
The supply chain in North America was completely annihilated. If you were an entrepreneur in 1984 and you approached an American retailer with a new video game concept, you would be swiftly escorted out of the building.
Don't even say the words.
Exactly. The term video game carried immense financial stigma.
It is a total cratering of the market. But the most incredible pivot in this entire history is that while the North American market lay in absolute ruins, completely convinced that interactive entertainment was dead, the architectural blueprint for the recovery was being meticulously designed across the Pacific.
Yes. In Japan,
Enter Nintendo.
Nintendo was a century-old company that had successfully transitioned from playing cards to electronic toys and arcade cabinets. In 1983, the exact same year the American market crashed, Nintendo released their own home console in Japan, the Family Computer, or Famicom.
Now, the Famicom was a massive domestic success in Japan.
Huge.
But Nintendo's leadership didn't just look at the American wreckage and assume they could effortlessly sweep in. They deeply analyzed the mechanics of the crash. What was the central realization they took away from Atari's failure?
The leadership at Nintendo, particularly Hiroshi Yamauchi and Nintendo of America's Minoru Arakawa, correctly diagnosed the core pathology of the crash.
What did they see that everyone else missed?
They realized that the North American consumer didn't suddenly hate the concept of interactive entertainment. They hated profoundly broken, terrible video games.
Ah, so the appetite was still there.
Exactly. The medium of the video game wasn't the problem. The complete lack of platform control was the problem.
They realized the well was poisoned, but people still want water. They just need a way to prove the water is clean.
That's a great way to put it.
But to convince the American retailers to even look at their product, they had to execute a masterclass in psychological rebranding.
Oh, the rebranding was genius. They understood that the physical aesthetic of the Famicom in Japan, which looked like a red and white plastic toy, would trigger immediate rejection from American retail buyers.
Because it looked like the thing sitting in the bargain bins.
Exactly. So they completely redesigned the hardware housing for the Western market. They built a gray, brutalist horizontal box that looked remarkably similar to a front-loading VCR or a high-end piece of stereo equipment.
It doesn't look like a toy at all. It looks like serious consumer electronics.
Deliberately so.
And they changed the nomenclature entirely. They refuse to call it a video game console.
Right. They named it the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES. The cartridges were no longer called video games. They were called game packs.
Game packs.
The console didn't have a cartridge slot. It had a control deck. They meticulously scrubbed the lexicon of any terminology associated with the Atari era.
They even used a Trojan horse of their own to get onto store shelves, didn't they?
Yes, the robot.
Right. They bundled the initial release with a plastic robot called ROB, the Robotic Operating Buddy.
Which is such a funny detail.
Because ROB barely functioned, and it was only compatible with 2 games.
But it worked as a prop.
Exactly. Its sheer presence allowed Nintendo to approach retail buyers and say, hey, we aren't selling a video game console, we are selling an interactive robotic toy system. They circumvented the electronics buyers entirely and pitched directly to the toy buyers.
And the aesthetic rebranding got them into the physical stores. But the actual mechanical solution to the 1983 crash, the true innovation that resurrected the industry, was how Nintendo handled the software ecosystem.
This is the crucial part.
They studied the Activision lawsuit, and they realized they could not rely on legal threats to stop unauthorized third-party developers. They needed a physical, hardware-level lockdown.
This is the brilliance of the 10NES chip. Walk us through how this hardware-based DRM fundamentally changed platform economics.
So the 10NES system was a proprietary authentication protocol. It was effectively a lock-and-key mechanism. Nintendo installed a specific microchip inside the console itself and a corresponding microchip inside every single authorized cartridge.
Okay, a physical lock and key.
When you inserted a game and pressed power, the console chip would send a query to the cartridge chip. If the cartridge chip responded with the correct cryptographic handshake, the game would boot.
And if that handshake failed, or if an unauthorized third-party developer tried to manufacture a cartridge without that specific chip, what happened?
The console would enter a continuous reset loop. The power light would flash on and off, and the television screen would just blink, completely locking the software out.
You literally couldn't play it.
Exactly. This hardware-level security gave Nintendo absolute dictatorial control over who could publish software on their platform.
Because Nintendo controlled the physical manufacturing of the chips, they forced all third-party developers into incredibly strict licensing agreements. You couldn't just write code and stamp out your own plastic cartridges anymore like in the Atari days.
Not a chance.
You had to submit your game to Nintendo for review.
And the licensing terms were notoriously draconian. But they were deeply necessary to correct the market anarchy. For example, a third-party publisher was limited to releasing only 5 games per year on the NES.
Only 5.
Furthermore, Nintendo required the publisher to order the physical cartridges directly from them, with massive minimum order quantities paid up front.
Talk about skin in the game.
Right. And most importantly, the game had to pass Nintendo's rigorous quality assurance testing.
Think about how radically this shifts the balance of power. The 5-game limit is brilliant because it forces publishers to self-censor.
Absolutely.
If you only have 5 slots a year, you aren't going to waste one on a quickly coded, broken cash grab like a Quaker Oats dog food game.
No, you can't afford to.
You're going to put your best teams on your best concepts to ensure a return on your massive upfront manufacturing investment.
This strict curation generated a baseline of competence across the entire library. And Nintendo communicated this new standard of reliability directly to the consumer through a brilliant piece of visual marketing.
The official Nintendo seal of quality.
It is a seal of quality.
It was a little gold Starburst sticker placed right on the corner of every licensed box. Psychologically, that sticker was doing an immense amount of heavy lifting.
It really was.
It wasn't necessarily promising that the game was a masterpiece. It was a contractual promise to the consumer that the game had been tested, it would boot up, the controls would respond, and it wasn't a fraudulent piece of software.
The seal of quality solved the core anxiety of the 1983 crash. It protected the retailers from getting saddled with broken, returned inventory, and it guaranteed the parents holding the wallets that they weren't wasting $40 on another ET scenario.
And we cannot understate the role of the actual software in this recovery. The strict licensing protected the floor of quality, but Nintendo's internal development pushed the ceiling into the stratosphere.
Oh, absolutely.
When a consumer plugged in Super Mario Bros., they experienced side-scrolling physics, complex level design, and precise controls that made the Atari 2600 look like ancient history. The technological leap was undeniable.
By meticulously controlling the ecosystem and delivering undeniable software quality, Nintendo resurrected the North American market.
They saved it.
They brought the publishers back from bankruptcy. They provided a stable, highly profitable ecosystem for developers to build new studios, and they proved to retail giants that interactive entertainment was a permanent, lucrative fixture of modern commerce.
They didn't just revive a dead industry. They fundamentally engineered the blueprint for platform economics.
The whole model.
The concept of hardware lockouts, mandatory certification, and licensing fees. That is the exact same architecture that governs the modern gaming industry, modern smartphone app stores, and digital ecosystems today. The Wild West was permanently closed.
The crash of 1983 was incredibly destructive, but looking back, it was an essential evolutionary bottleneck.
It had to happen.
It did. It purged the speculators and the opportunists from the market, forcing the surviving entities to prioritize the consumer experience over rapid, unsustainable expansion.
So if we pull all these threads together, the mechanical and economic lessons from this deep dive are intensely relevant right now. We see the fatal danger of unmoderated oversaturation. We see the exact mechanism of how stock balancing and deep discounting can cannibalize an entire supply chain.
A total domino effect.
And most crucially, we see that treating your creative talent as replaceable cogs while rushing broken products to market will completely obliterate the foundational trust of your consumer base.
And once that trust is shattered, the sheer momentum of an industry will not save it. The bigger the bubble, the more violent the pop. Which leaves us with a highly relevant framework to analyze our current landscape.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Because the crash of '83 proved that even the most unstoppable, rapidly growing tech sectors can collapse if they flood the market with low-effort garbage and break the implicit contract with the public.
Consider the massive tech gold rushes happening all around us today. Look at the absolute deluge of AI-generated content flooding digital storefronts, the endless fragmentation and sudden price hikes in streaming services, or the uncurated wilderness of early access software models.
Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
Which of these explosive, seemingly invincible industries might be ignoring their own foundational cracks, accelerating blindly toward their own 1983-style implosion?
It is a question of when, not if, the market forces a correction on systems that prioritize infinite volume over verifiable quality.
That is a complex, sobering thought to keep with you long after we wrap up today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We started with an industry that arrogantly believed it had defeated gravity, only to watch it bury the physical evidence of its hubris in a desert landfill.
A literal burial.
And ultimately, we saw how a rigorous dedication to quality and platform control brought the medium back from the dead. Keep the mechanics of that collapse in mind the next time you find yourself paralyzed by choice in a digital marketplace. Until next time.